Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 232. Today's topic, a deep dive into the death rites of primitive religion.
Orcs!
What?
Orcs! More orcs.
What do you mean more orcs?
Orcs.
I have a whole show. No, I have show notes.
Birthday.
If I got
orcs.
All right, for your birthday, if we have to do it. All right, so today we're gonna do.
Trust an orc.
We're gonna do orcs. Wait a minute, wasn't it your birthday like 2 weeks ago?
No. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram, the honest,
Celebratorily yours, I am Michael Miller.
who knows the words.
I know your damn words. Jeff insisted on 2 episodes on orcs. The race so nice, we had to do them twice.
Well, the thing that's interesting was the first time we sort of talked about the proto-orc culture or the orc race. And the thing is, due to shifts, and I talked about a little bit, some went to the plains, some stayed in the mountains. So there's a deviation, and 2 races ended up. So
do they have like actual physical like what's the word I'm looking for?
They have actual racial differences.
There's a word. Evolutionary differences is what I was shooting for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's like, in theory, the way it really works is when, let's say, like when humans split off from the primate. You know, some people will think like, well, we're related to the bonobos, so our relatives were bonobo. That's not true. And back then, bonobos.
I was about to say we're not related to bonobos directly, are we?
Bonobos are the closest primate related to us.
I thought they were the closest only genetically, but not that we were evolved from that direct line of.
Maybe
I'm thinking of the wrong one. Aren't they really small?
No, they look very similar to chimpanzees. They're a little smaller.
Okay, then I am thinking of a different monkey.
They have a monkey which would have been much earlier on, and we're related to them as well too. But the monkey paths deviated from the primate path earlier. We deviated, and bonobos and chimpanzees have come off since us, but in different directions.
Fair enough.
And the thing is, a lot of times people think that it's a static thing, and so like we were a chimpanzee at one point, but the chimpanzees weren't chimpanzees back then, and neither were we. And bonobos weren't bonobos back then. We've all evolved and changed.
Of course. Yeah, there's been parallel changes through the different species as time has passed.
So which leads me to the fact here that I'm framework world building. I'm not real world building. I can't build a world. I don't know how. I don't have the time to.
Sissy.
But 108 billion or 108 billion people, I think, or trillion people have been alive on the earth, or 108 billion. A whole bunch of people have been alive, on the earth since putting this thing together for just the human side of things. So, I don't have the time. I don't have Michael's time machines. So the thing is, and this is kind of the way I do it as I'm BS evolving stuff in my world. So they started the mountains. So the specific traits we were talking about racially last time, their skin tone, their general toughness, those are all the traits of actual where they would be a proto-orc in the real world. They just stay with my mountain orcs, because there's another line that deviates off of that the way I do it. So my mountain orcs do essentially stay the same. Culturally, they evolve, and they evolve in many different ways, but the evolution, racially just kind of stops at that point, because that's where I want them to be. But I need my other orcs a little different. The skin tones and stuff don't work as well, on the plains, and you can kind of do some stuff to cover up, but I want to deviate them color-wise as well. So just to help make them more distinctive, to make it easier for consumers, of my fiction, whether they be at a game table or they, come at it from a book, they'll be able to distinguish if they know the two races, if they've seen enough for their character to know, or their character background would allow it. Okay, so mountain orcs have actually skin tones much closer to humans. Still very flat, darker colored. Probably even more Eastern. Sort of the sort of a more pale brown color. So that's kind of where their skin tone range is going to be at. And it's not that they have Eastern culture, so I want them to look like, or what people, in the old world would call Oriental people, which is, besides being a wrong term, people of East Asia. It's just it's just not a right term. But for me, that kind of skin tone, that kind of color goes in well. So people who would have that skin tone would be a bit more successful, and over time, they would reproduce more, and the gene would become dominant. So the skin tones start shifting more to human skin tones. They're still bulkier than a human, but they're not as bulky as mountain orcs. And part of that is their the more weight that they have hurts them in a nomadic sense. So, like I said, the last episode, wargs are heavily tied into ancient orcs and mountain orcs. But as they come down to the plains, wargs have shorter legs than horses. Wargs have shorter legs than camels. So the problem is they're not super effective as a mount in plains and in desert areas. So there is a tradition leading back to wargs. So there are some wargs evolved, but typically if they're out doing bad things, if they're raiding, if they're in those type of activities, they've shifted more to horses and camels. And so the thing is, the leaner their upper body is, the less endurance the horse loses by moving them. They're a little bit more aerodynamic. They have a little bit less drag because their body's a little trimmer. Not as trimmed down as humans or some of the other races, but in comparison to a mountain orc, structurally they're a little bit different. Their legs are much shorter. Not much shorter, not like 5 feet shorter, but like their torso and legs don't match up. They have shorter legs than what their torso would indicate. So, if it was a normal human, they would be like 6'2". But they're actually about 5'8". Actually, probably not quite that big. But they've lost a few inches. They're shorter because they spend most of their time mounted. So people with big, strong legs, whose legs are designed to stay in a saddle for a long time, do really well. Long legs aren't needed for running because one of the differences between mountain orcs and plains orcs is plains orcs are mounted most of their life. They can actually sleep on their horses. The horses are moving slower at the time. They will typically move with them bundled, so they'll have 4 or 5 mounts sort of linked by rope to them, so they can actually switch mounts without dismounting. So, like most of the steppe peoples do.
Was that a common thing here on Earth?
That's also a common thing here on Earth. When you have like a massive raid or army moving on, a lot of times you'll have multiple mounts that are shared between, and not all tribes do it, but typically the more successful tribes do things like that. So like your Malayars, specifically, I believe were ones that did that, probably the Scythians as well. But it's because they can stay on their horses longer. It makes them more successful as a nomadic people. Versus the agrarian people, which is one of the things that frustrates the agrarian people, is when they actually get into conflicts, it's so hard to pin down the nomads and their army or even their villages because they're always moving. By the time the big agricultural empire can muster up its forces and present them on the battlefield, the enemy they've left. They've moved somewhere else.
Yeah, we're out, guys.
Yep.
gotta go.
So because of that, the way my brain thinks about it is they're still tougher than humans all over. But their upper body is not as tough as the upper body of a mountain orc. Punch for punch, all things being equal there, a mountain orc will, beat up a plains orc in a fist fight. However, the legs of the mountain orc are even more durable since they don't need to be as agile in walking. Mountain orcs do use dismounted a lot more than plains orcs almost never use it. Mountain orcs have very, very tough legs, which makes them poor at walking. They're actually substandard to human nomads at walking, which in general, most nomads aren't great at walking anyway because they're used to being on horseback. But they're actually structurally not quite as sound to walk because their lower body has evolved in such a way, but it's also made their legs tougher. So unless you sever the leg, it's probably not going to lose its grip on a horse, which especially before you get to the bit bridle and stirrups of a horse, you get to all of those things that really made the saddle a very powerful thing and really up the level of mounted soldiers. That's a really tough thing. It's really easy to get knocked off of a horse when you fight with melee weapons. But orcs are very good at just kind of grasping on with their legs and holding on. So until you sever it, it will probably not let go of its grip.
So, do you have? Is one of these races more of a favorite to you than the other?
Oh, the mountain orcs, definitely.
I was going to guess that.
The mountain orcs are my favorite by far. Something about them I've actually developed quite a bit of the mountain orcs. The Ordescent orcs have made appearances in probably more games than mountain orcs have.
Mm-hmm.
But I've actually developed their culture a lot less. I know a lot less about it. I have those general framework things set up about it, where the mountain orcs actually have a whole culture sort of figured out about what they really are. With a lot more details where I can go in, where with the plains orcs, it's like I have this framework which creates a pattern that I can make assumptions based off of, but I don't have the actual culture ever. I never fleshed it out because to me they're both cultures that are losing. Over time, even in this time period, they seem past their height, and now there's always a fear that they're going to make a comeback, and people are worried because they're pretty strong, but they seem past their prime. At least as making an impact on the local agrarian cultures. As earlier on, they were a force to be feared. They were unstoppable. And now they've been stopped over and over again.
So sad for the orcs.
So some of the things that start to then further deviate the race, but I decided not to make a third race, is a major kingdom, and we've talked about them before, the Ascuri, formed sort of near what they call the heart of the world, which is literally sort of the dead center of this Pangean continent. And actually the Buardrakkeniem and the Ascuri lived north of them in the same sort of general area. But as the Ascuri start picking up steam, what happens is a lot of the other agrarian cultures nearby start getting swallowed up, and you start getting this really massive, very powerful empire backed with incredible magic that starts like just swallowing up massive swaths of the thing. And what happens is at this time the Buardrakkeniem are nomadic, as are the orcs. So they all start to migrate. And so the Buardrakkeniem are closer. They migrate first. They head up to the arm of the continent. And then as the Ascuri grow in power and threat, then the plains orcs and their tribes who are north of them kind of split into two parts, one to the east and one to the west. So culturally at that point they deviate. But I purposely don't change them racially because up until like very recent history, they essentially have the same type of lifestyle. It's just they start having different beliefs. Their language separates over time, and they have a lot of cultural deviations. But there's not enough environmental change to really dictate a third race coming off of them. So I kind of draw the line at that point from creating a third race. And there are only minor differences, but really there aren't a lot of things deviating species that are closely related. Like there really aren't. It's like if you ever find a picture of two bonobos in a great night, they'll sit out, they'll stare at a sunset, arms wrapped around each other. It looks like a picture you've seen 1,000 times with two humans. Now they don't
know that.
Oh yeah, no, they can appreciate a sunset. They're really good at communicating with each other. They don't really have language, but they can communicate really well with each other. And that's kind of where they deviate. A kind of a major deviation, but it's still genetically very minor that they can't quite get over that language hump. So we're really not that far separate from other species. Sometimes we look different, it can look radically different, but a species change, still isn't that far apart, but it's much more significant to me than a cultural change. For me, you need massive environmental differences to really deviate a new race one from another. And the irony being sometimes things consider themselves a different race, but they really aren't. Like if you would ask the elves in my world, there are 4 races of elves. That's simply not true. There are 2. But it's kind of like language, right? It's like some people will say I have a different language than them, and maybe because they live in a different country. But it's really the same. It's probably a different dialect. It'd be like if the South and the North actually the world was different and we were a different country, might say we have a different language. It's actually unusual that we say we speak English because we separated from England. And honestly, we are just a dialect of English, but or several dialects of English at this point.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, people from England don't say Americans speak English. Yeah. they say you speak American English.
You speak American English. That's right.
Not English.
Well, exactly, and really, they're all dialects. And I've been watching a lot of educational stuff, so I don't want to get caught down that rabbit hole because I find it really interesting. That'll be a different episode. But
yeah, actually, that I find that to be an interesting topic.
We talk about how languages form and evolve over time, but the thing to keep in mind is sometimes. And it's okay when you do this. Sometimes just calling it a different race is fine. They might not have any stat differences on a sheet if you're doing like a role-playing game-wise. They might be exactly the same systematically. The thing is, it's often the perception of things that create the reality. So the thing is, here on Earth, sometimes based on color, we say different races. But that's really just a decision we've made in our heads. Rather than, an actual scientific term. There's no actual scientific definition of what defines a new race. So, the thing is sometimes it's going to be an ethnic difference might get them to call themselves race. And so it doesn't really matter how much they even genetically differ from each other. Like the orcs in my world would probably consider themselves 3 different races. Even though race isn't so important to them, they're nomadic tribesmen. If they get intermingled with all kinds of other races that are on the steppes, and the steppes are massive in my world, so there are lots of different races that have some groups on the steppes. So it's typically, if you can keep up and you can stay on your horse and you can do what is needed by the tribe, you become a member of the tribe. And most tribal communities, irregardless if they're nomads or not, are typically, if you can come in and do your thing, we'll let you. It's not always true. You have like the island somewhere in the south, I think in the Pacific, or maybe the Indian Ocean, where the people will attack anyone who lands on the beach. So you would never have the shot. But so there are always groups like that are typically very secluded for long periods of time. And it probably had an event a long time in their past that was a betrayal, which put them on that course. So that is really it for this episode. For the meat of the episode, at least.
Is there any cultural things that you want to talk about between the two?
I mean, you can sort of derive some of the stuff there, but the thing is, for me, culture is my big game. So if we start going into cultural differences, especially since I haven't developed one, and maybe we'll do that at some point, we'll sit down, we'll take my framework and maybe flesh it out a bit more for the Ordescents, which are my plains orcs in the west. But my mountain orcs, which all went west, are very similar. So, and I have a lot of stuff worked out on them. So those are too big for me to really fit into one episode. Even though I do have one final note here, something I've completely missed in my cultural development, and I talk about it, and it's important to me, but I don't make it fundamental enough. And I just want to throw this out there as a, world builder task / thing to think about. Make food the first thing you think about when you build a culture.
Interesting. Why?
Because the food really is the thing that gets the people at the table together, that gets them sharing ideas, that forms the culture. So the food predates the common beliefs, which get shared once they start sharing food.
Interesting.
So it's the food that you eat, the way you get it, and you sort of build up cultures over time, but it's at the table. And then from there, you look at the geography. The geography of the actual area they're at to see, is there wood? Is there sand? What kind of building materials are there? And those two things will tell you a lot about what's important to whoever lives there. And then the racial traits will tell you, well, they're super strong, so that's not an obstacle for them, where for a weaker race, they're going to have to deal with something environmentally more than other people would.
So, the world builder task of the day is create an orc race. I'm sure you guys didn't see that coming.
Yeah, but deviate it from your first race.
Yes, so this is your second orc race, because for Jeff's first birthday, you should have already made an orc race.
And for my second birthday, you build another one.
And what's the real world task of the day?
Okay. Come into the Undercroft. I love orcs.
Almost as much as Derek likes gnomes.
No. I wish I could reach that level of love, but I can't get there. So, but I aspire to that someday. So
I think you can get there.
Go to facebook.com/groups/Undercroft and join our group. There'll be 3 simple questions you have to answer. And you actually get bonus points if you're a smart aleck while you do it.
Yeah, that's simply to weed out bots and spammers and stuff.
Exactly.
So it's really, there's no real wrong answer.
Except to the I will share in the promo thread.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, the promo one. We want you to follow the rules on the promo.
But most people seem to get that. So
yeah, everyone's been respectful.
Yeah, and sometimes I do give permission for special occasions, but make sure to ask if you're unsure. But that's fine. Just come into the Undercroft. Sharing this, even if it's on your website, that don't count. Or if you just write a blurb, there'll probably be a lot. I typically put up a question every day. And usually Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's either a world building prompt or it's something I'm thinking about. And a lot of times it's something derived from the episode that's out that week. So drop on in right now if you want to talk about orcs and let us know. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.